Lisa has always been a person who appreciated loneliness. She grew up in a quiet family where there were no scandals or conflicts, but there was something more disturbing. Endless silence. No one ever talked about feelings in the house. My father left early for work, returned late, throwing only a couple of dry phrases at dinner, and my mother looked out the window, occupying her time with endless knitting and cleaning. Lisa was 16 when she first realized that none of her parents knew who she really was. What she loves, what she is interested in, what fears she has, and it scared her. The feeling of isolation from her family gradually grew in her like a bitter root, and by the age of 20, Lisa was already trying to avoid home. When she entered the university, she finally had freedom, her own place in the student dormitory. She tried to avoid the past and began a new life, as if freeing herself from the unbearable silence that had haunted her all these years. Lisa became friends with a group of students, mostly introverts like her. They spent time together, went to the cinema, and discussed their studies. Everything seemed calm and even normal. However, one of these friendships turned out to be more complicated. Mark, a tall guy with tired eyes and heavy eyes, quickly became her closest friend. He seemed to her to be someone who also understood loneliness, and he did not need to be entertained with conversations. They spent a lot of time together, silently studying study materials or just sitting next to each other in the dorm room. But soon, Lisa began to notice something strange in Mark's behavior. He often disappeared for whole nights, never explaining where he was. And although they didn't discuss their personal lives in detail, she sensed that something was wrong with him. One evening, returning to the hostel, Lisa found an unfamiliar note on her bed. There was only one question in it. Have you ever seen how quickly a person disappears? Lisa didn't know how to feel about it. She thought it was someone's joke. Perhaps one of her friends decided to have fun, as their company often discussed mysterious cases and mysterious disappearances. She put the note aside, not paying attention. But something has changed in her life since then. After a couple of days, Mark started behaving even more strangely. He stopped showing up at the university and no longer replied to her messages. Lisa tried to find him at the dorm, but his neighbors said they hadn't seen him for several days. At first, she did not attach much importance to this. Perhaps he had some business, decided to leave for a while. But when a week had passed and Mark had not shown up, an uneasy feeling began to grow in her soul. Everything intensified when she received the second note. This time, the handwriting was different, unlike the previous one. It said, "Have you found the answers to your questions yet?" Lisa couldn't remember asking any questions. Were the questions about her, or was this message accidental? The notes may have been part of someone's joke, but Lisa started panicking anyway. Perhaps she should have contacted the hostel administration or even the police, but she felt stupid because she was afraid of some notes. Over the next week, the anxiety increased. The notes continued to appear, each new one containing more personal and disturbing questions. "Have you ever wondered who stands behind your shoulders when you sleep?" said one of them. Lisa felt the pressure build up with each new note, as if someone was watching her. One night, when she was sitting at the table listening to music with headphones, she suddenly heard the door of the room creak, although it was closed. Soon the situation became unbearable. The notes kept coming, and their tone became more threatening. Lisa tried to find their source, but to no avail. She began to suspect everyone: neighbors, friends, even random people at the university. Her social circle has narrowed to a minimum. Fear took over her mind, and every step outside the dorm seemed dangerous to her. In the evenings, returning from the university, she increasingly noticed shadows behind her, or it seemed that someone was following her. But every time Lisa turned around, she didn't see anyone. One night, Lisa woke up to a strange sound and found her door slightly ajar. She definitely remembered that she had closed it before going to bed. Her heart was pounding in her chest as she got out of bed and peeked cautiously into the hallway. No sign of outsiders. The air was filled with a strange tension, as if something was hovering in the shadows. The next day, she decided to contact her friends, but they were all busy studying or with their own problems. Mark, who had disappeared without a trace before, never appeared. His belongings disappeared from the room. Lisa tried to contact his relatives, but it turned out that they had not communicated with him for a long time. Someone even said that Mark had changed his phone number a long time ago and moved to another city. It seemed impossible. Not long ago he was here next to her, and now his life seems to have been erased. The anxiety was growing every day. When one day Lisa received a note again with the simple words, "Tonight you will find out the truth," she realized that she could no longer stand it. Fear took over her completely, and she decided not to stay in the dorm that night. Panic overcame her. She quickly packed her things and went to her parents, hoping to hide from the frightening events. But this did not bring relief either. That evening, when Lisa was sitting in her childhood room, trying to calm her nerves, a shadow flashed outside the window. She froze. Her house was in a quiet suburb where rarely anyone passed by at such a time. Suddenly there was a knock on the window. Lisa, not believing what was happening, came closer, and her heart literally stopped. There was a man standing behind the glass. Lisa froze in place, staring at the dark figure outside the window. The night light did not illuminate the stranger's face well, but she could make out his silhouette. The man stood motionless, as if waiting for her to take the first step. Fear paralyzed her. She could neither scream nor move. He raised his hand, slowly knocked again. 3 steady taps, cold and indifferent, as if he knew she was there, knew she was looking. Suddenly her phone rang. In the silence of the room, the sound became frightening and harsh. Lisa almost dropped it when she saw the name on the screen. Mark. Her heart began to beat even faster. It's impossible. She knew that Mark had disappeared. She knew that he couldn't just call her after weeks of silence. With a heavy feeling, she held the phone to her ear. "Hello," came his quiet voice. "Are you still looking for answers?" Lisa couldn't say a word. Her gaze darted from the phone to the window. The man outside didn't move, just stood waiting. "You see him, don't you?" Mark continued. "You think it's someone else, but the truth is, he was always there for me." Lisa's heart was pounding in her chest. Her fingers gripped the phone so tightly that her knuckles turned white. She tried to speak, but her voice wouldn't work. "I don't understand," she finally whispered. "What did you do? Who is it?" "It doesn't matter," his voice remained calm. "The important thing is that you can disappear too, just like me." She glanced at the window. The man was still standing there like a statue. His face was still in shadow, but Lisa felt that he was looking right at her. Suddenly it dawned on her. These notes, this fear, it was all about Mark. But why? She didn't know. "I want you to understand one thing, Lisa." Mark's voice pierced the silence again. "We can all disappear. No one will notice. No one will remember." Suddenly the connection was interrupted. She abruptly lowered the phone and looked out the window. The figure disappeared. Lisa felt a terrible emptiness. It wasn't a relief, but rather a feeling that something terrible had just begun. She knew it wasn't safe to stay here. That night, almost without thinking, she packed up all her things, ran out of the house and got into the car. Her parents were completely unaware, sleeping in their rooms when Lisa left. She couldn't explain why she did it. It was almost instinctive. She knew one thing. She couldn't stay in this city, in this house anymore. Her trip was aimless. She just drove where her eyes were looking, not knowing what would happen next. A few hours later, exhausted and dehydrated, she stopped at a gas station to buy water and collect her thoughts. When Lisa went inside, her phone rang again. The number was not determined. "Hello," said the voice. But it wasn't Mark. "You don't think you're just going to run away, do you?" Lisa slowly lowered the water bottle. Her breathing began to quicken. The voice continued. "You know who I am. You understood a long time ago." "No," she gasped, cutting the connection and rushing out into the street. Looking around, she noticed a car, an old dark sedan, parked around the corner of the gas station. The headlights weren't on, but she sensed that someone inside was watching her. Fear gripped her again, making her move nervously and jump into her car. Lisa abruptly started the engine and drove off, not knowing where to go. She understood one thing. She was being chased, she was confused, and now she couldn't stop. The only way out was to move, to escape, and as far away as possible from the horror that was catching up with her. Time passed, and Lisa hardly slept. The days merged into one endless nightmare state. The notes didn't come back, but the voice on the phone continued to haunt her. Sometimes it was Mark, sometimes it was someone else. They always said the same thing: she would not be able to escape her disappearance. One day, while staying in a small hotel on the edge of the highway, she tried to contact the police and tell her story. The officer listened to her, but only shook his head. "Notes, calls, it could just be a joke," he said, writing down her details. "It happens. If they continue, call us." But that didn't calm Lisa down. She knew it was more than just someone's joke. She knew that someone was following her. And this someone knows everything about her. That night at the hotel, Lisa heard a familiar sound. The creak of a door that should have been locked. Her heart skipped a beat as she slowly turned her head towards the door. It was ajar, and behind it stood the same figure again, the one she had seen outside her house window. Lisa realized that this was the end. She had nowhere to run. Isa jumped to her feet abruptly, her breath coming in short gasps, her heart pounding wildly in her chest. Her mind kept saying one thing: run, but her legs seemed motionless, as if the roots had taken root in the floor. The figure at the door took a step forward, and at that moment she felt that it was inevitable. Panic overwhelmed her as the man got even closer. She glanced at the window. 5th floor. Escape through the window? It's unrealistic, but there was no choice. She knew that if she stayed, no one would find her. She remembered Mark's words: "We can all disappear. No one will notice." Opening the window abruptly, Lisa looked down. The city seemed alien, as if it belonged to another world in which she no longer had the right to exist. A cold wind hit her face, and her fingers clutched the edge of the windowsill convulsively. The man was almost at her side. "You can't hide," a voice, muffled and confident, sounded behind him. Lisa jumped. The moment of free fall lasted forever. Time seemed to slow down. Past life, small moments of joy and fear flashed before my eyes. She desperately clung to the hope of salvation. But every moment she realized that there would be no salvation. Hit. The feeling of the earth was cruel, painful, tearing. But Lisa was still alive. Screeching tires, screams of passers-by, sudden movements. She realized that she was lying on the asphalt. Her body was hurting, but her mind was still clear. People were gathering around. Someone was already calling an ambulance. Suddenly, she felt hands gently lifting her head. Lisa slowly opened her eyes and saw a familiar face. It was Mark. "Are you okay, Lisa?" "What is it?" he asked in a calm voice, too calm for such a moment. She wanted to scream that it was impossible, that he's dead, that he's gone. But the words stuck in my throat. All she could do was stare at him in horror. "It's over, Lisa," Mark continued, smiling. "Now you can disappear." At that moment, she felt everything around her go quiet. The sounds of sirens, the voices of people, the noise of cars, everything slowly sank into silence, as if someone had turned off the sound of the world. She felt her body weaken, and the realization of what was happening engulfed her completely. She disappears. Her vision began to fade. All the colors began to merge into one gray spot. Her heart slowed down until it stopped completely. Lisa no longer felt pain, only absolute emptiness. Passers-by who saw her fall stood in shock. But the strangest thing was that Lisa's body suddenly disappeared. People were looking at the empty place where the girl had just been lying. No one could explain how it happened. They called the police, the ambulance, but there was no body, no trace, no evidence. Lisa just disappeared as if she had never existed, and no one remembered.